It's Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and today we are going to talk about a woman named Theresa Flores. Theresa is a survivor and an advocate, and I think her story is going to surprise you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to my channel and Killer Concepts, the place where we talk about all things true crime. My name is Peyton. Before we get started, please make sure to hit that red subscribe button down below and turn on your post notifications so you do not miss any future content. This month is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and so we are going to discuss a survivor of trafficking. Her name is Theresa Flores. Her story is one of hope, but it is very sad. Trigger warning to everyone out there, as it does hit on very sensitive subject matter. This is a story of sex trafficking. Theresa's story is different than most I have heard or would have thought about when it comes to human trafficking, and so I thought this would be a good one to discuss. So, Theresa was just a normal girl living in the suburbs when she became a victim, and nobody around her even knew it was happening. With that being said, let's get started. So these details are from Theresa Flores' account. So when Theresa was 15, her and her family moved to Birmingham, Michigan. Her dad worked for GE, General Electric, as an engineer, and so they typically relocated for his job every 2 years. For this reason, Theresa didn't have many friends because she wasn't in one place for a long time, so she was new at the school. Theresa was the definition of a well-behaved daughter for her parents. She ran track, she got good grades, she was a virgin because she was really religious. Her parents were big Catholics, and she was just an overall good girl. She was even pretty involved in her church, and she always went to mass. Like I said, they were a big Catholic family, and so they really followed those values. Her parents had told her that she couldn't date until she was 16 years old. So when she was a sophomore at Birmingham Grove High School, she was only 15, and she saw a boy that really caught her eye. He was different. He wasn't like anyone else or anyone she had ever seen before. She said unlike the other boys in school who wore jeans, he wore slacks to school. He would wear Ralph Lauren polos and gold chains. He was fancy, he had beautiful dark hair, and she became interested in him. The other girls at school had told her that if she talked to him, they wouldn't be friends with her. But since she didn't really have friends anyway, I don't think she really thought much into it. And when this guy she was enamored by comes up to her and asks her if she wanted a ride home from school, of course she would say yes. He was an older guy. She found him attractive, and she was interested in him. So as I said, she didn't have any friends, so there was really nothing to worry about for her. And she was excited that he had invited her to go with him. She didn't think there was anything to worry about because he went to school with her, right? What could go wrong? So Theresa said that he had a nice car when she walked out, and so she hopped right in. As they were pulling out of the parking lot, she noticed he was turning out away from her home. Her house was in the other direction, so basically like he was making a right instead of making a left out of the parking lot. He just told her that he had to stop and get something at his house quick. He had to stop by his house, and she didn't think anything of it. She said okay. They went to his house, and it was impressive. She said it was a big house. Her house was nice already. Her family wasn't hard for money because her dad was an engineer, but this house was way big in comparison. So he asked Theresa if she wants to come inside with him, and he took her upstairs with him. And this is when he would give her a Coke out of a mini fridge he had in his bedroom. Never in a million years did she think the soda would be drugged. After all, she was with a guy who went to her high school. After a few minutes, she would start to feel dizzy, and he would begin to kiss her and force himself on her. She would tell him to stop, but it wouldn't work. She was always really good with telling people to stop if they were going too far. But like I said, it didn't work, and he would then rape her. Theresa would go home, and she wouldn't say anything to anyone. She felt ashamed. She didn't have any friends to talk to, and as I said before, her family were devoted Catholics, and they did not believe in sex before marriage, and so she did not want to tell them. Even though she had been raped, she didn't want to tell her parents that she was no longer a virgin. So she tried to pretend like it never happened, which a lot of victims of rape do. It's a common thing. It's not unusual. So she went back to school and she just went on living her life. Until a couple days later, he would come up to her in school again and he would corner her. But this time he had pictures with him. He told her that his cousins had been there and they had taken pictures of her rape. He began to blackmail her with them. And he threatened to send them to her father's work, show them to her family, show them to her church, and threatened to hurt her family if she didn't do what they wanted her to. So he gave her that option and that option only. She could work for him and his cousins. And this is how she would get the pictures back. This is when the trafficking would begin for Theresa Flores. So for the next 2 years, Theresa would be sold around Detroit, mainly to wealthy men in the area. She said they would get in contact with her, and she was expected to leave right away, to jump at their call. And she would sneak out of her home in PJs with no shoes on, so nobody could hear her walking. Then she would get in a Trans Am that would be waiting for her down the road, who would take her to the location that they were selling her at. She would be assaulted. She said sometimes she would be tied up. Sometimes she would be beaten. She would be sold to the men. And then she would hope that she would get home earlier rather than later so that she would have some time to go to sleep before she had to go to school the next morning. Remember, she was only, when this was happening, this happened for 2 years, she was 15 to 17 years old. Theresa was still in high school. Her grades would begin to slip. She had always gotten really good grades. She would drop out of sports. She loved sports, but she was just so tired. She remembers her worst night, though, the most vividly. And this night would have a huge impact on her life later, but I will tell you about that in a little bit. So she was picked up by a driver one night who wasn't her typical driver. She didn't know him. And she was kidnapped and she was taken to a small motel, the kind with a little diner off to the side. And there was 20 men there. She was only 16 and she would be auctioned off to the highest bidder in the room. And this would happen over and over again until she finally passed out. They would leave Theresa there in the motel room, hurt and bleeding, and she would finally come to, luckily, and she would make her way over to the diner when she would ask for someone to call for help. The police would come get Theresa and then they would take her back home. But even with this incident, with the police picking her up, Theresa would never get her freedom from these guys until 2 years after the abuse began and her family moved again. Like I said, they moved every 2 years, so they moved again when she was 17. She never said anything until at least after they moved, and even after they moved, I think it had been a little while because she was afraid somebody would hurt her family. Somebody in that area, you know, those people had connections. They would sell her to these rich people in the area that were high up. They were prominent members of the community. But she finally would begin to speak up eventually once they moved. And this is when Theresa's advocacy work would really begin. Theresa did say that she wishes she would have spoke up sooner and not been afraid because she worried that there was probably other girls in the area that it was happening to, and she may have been able to help them, and they probably never got help because these men were never arrested because it was never brought to light. And she never tried. But Theresa's really helping people now. So Theresa's story is absolutely terrifying, and maybe that's because it is a true story. Maybe it's because she was a child. She was only 15 years old when it started. She was a teen when she was trafficked, which is super common. And her story is so different. You don't expect to hear that somebody was trafficked out of their high school by a fellow student. And when you think of child trafficking, you usually think of child labor, and people don't usually talk about these stories enough, and that's why we're talking about it today. Like I said, it was a fellow student, someone that you should be able to trust, and this really makes me wonder, you know, what was happening at my high schools around me? Did this happen to anybody? So her story really gives a glimpse of a heartbreaking reality, and that is why she shares it. Theresa has written a book called The Slave Across the Street. She became a social worker. I believe she's finished her master's degree. She helped found a home to house kids who have been victims of trafficking and have nowhere to go. They can stay there, they can get therapy and the things that they need. And she also started a project that I want to talk to you about called Project Soap. The Soap Project. This one, I can't get over it. It was such a great idea, and that's why I really want to talk about it. So SOAP stands for Save Our Adolescents From Prostitution. It is a bar of soap that Theresa created that has, a packaging around the outside of it that has the human trafficking hotline on the packaging to a trafficked victim that may find the bar of soap. So these are the small bars of soap that you would usually find in a hotel or motel room, and so they are put in the bathrooms of these places, like hotels, motels, football stadiums, anywhere that trafficking may be really prominent. Theresa said she thought of this because even when she was being trafficked, they would let the girls or they would let her go into the bathroom and clean up after everything. And so if the girl had a chance to find this bar of soap, or male, there's men who are trafficked as well, and young boys. And if they could just find this bar of soap, it could possibly give them a little bit of hope. It would give them a number that they could call and hopefully get some help. Theresa actually said that it did help someone. There was a girl who had been kidnapped by a couple, and then she was taken across state lines. She was taken into, I believe it was Texas, Dallas, Texas, and she was sexually trafficked when they stopped at this hotel in Texas. And I think it was when the people went to sleep or when she ran away. I don't remember exactly. But she took the bar of soap with her and she made a phone call. And this phone call would get her connected with the human trafficking hotline. So this bar of soap gives people hope. Theresa said that she came up with this idea when she was driving back through the area where she had been trafficked, and she thought about that night that I told you about in the motel room with 20 men when she was kidnapped. And she had thought about, what could I do for another girl or another boy who may be going through the same thing as me, who don't have anybody to talk to. And so that's why she came with the bar of soap, because that could get them in contact with somebody that they can talk to and that can help them. People like Theresa Flores are a real gift to the world. After all she had been put through, all she wants to do is help others like her to have someone to talk to when she never did. She's truly remarkable. These people go through really hard times. There's high suicide rates of people who have been trafficked, as they don't know how to deal with it. Some of them need therapy. It can be really hard for them to get over it. And so somebody like Theresa is just an absolute inspiration. And we all should do our part into helping people like her. My last video was about the signs of human trafficking, if you want to watch that. And we should all be keeping our eye out for those signs, because we never know who may be around us who needs our help or could just use that number, that small number of the human trafficking hotline, which you can call, you can text, and you can even go on their website and you can live chat with them. Their website has a ton of resources, as well as an emergency exit on their website, kind of like the domestic violence hotline does. A whole bunch of hotlines are down in my description box. I made it a permanent thing that when I post, you can find them, because they're so important. There are so many hotlines that we need to pay attention to and make sure people get. Before we go today, don't forget to hit that red subscribe button down below, quick reminder, and you can follow me on social media if you'd like. But I did want to let you know that my whole backdrop, which I've had for quite a while, this whole tapestry has been here since I started doing my videos, is all going to change very soon. So at the end of the month, I am going to be moving, and so this stuff is going to slowly start to disappear. I'm going to try and keep up with my videos until I'm settled in the new house, but it's probably going to look a little bland for a while, and I got to get all my stuff set up at our new home. If I miss any videos, I will let you know in the community tab like I usually do, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. I'm not stopping doing this. I love doing it, but stuff's happening. With that being said, if you have any case suggestions, please send them to killerconceptsvlog@gmail.com. And that's all I have for you on this case and Theresa Flores. I highly recommend you go watch her TED Talk. It really is absolutely moving. And she's an incredible person, and I just had to talk about her. Just remember that the world's most dangerous minds hide in the most unlikely places, and to stay safe.